Okay, we are actually going to be traveling my house today. So we're going to start off in this room where I have my Quilt Maker Pro 20. And then after I show you on a true real quilt, drag and drop, because I can only really show you that one time on that quilt because it's a real quilt. And we're not going to sit here and watch my quilt a row for 20 minutes to do one more time of drag and drop. Then we're going to run over to the room where I have my Quilt Maker Pro 18, where I have just a sample piece that's sewing something really quick and fast, where I can do drag and drop over multiple times with you, okay? For those of you that don't know, if you want a tidbit of my personal life information, we just moved back to North Carolina, and I call that God's country because it's where I love to live. And we are in a rental house, so I have a dining room with one machine in it. I have a little formal living room with one machine in it. I have a little office. So I just have like this little whole bottom area of this house that I'm using for quilting. It's like a quilter's paradise. Okay, so are we ready? Let's get started. I'm gonna take my camera, because y'all are gonna need to see this stuff up close, and I've gotten better at knowing where these buttons are on my phone now. Okay, here we go. So I just want to point out something. Since last week we talked about tension, I want to show you something about tension on this particular quilt. Now, I'm quilting this for a dear friend of mine, and she made it for her granddaughter, okay? And she wanted the quilting to really show up, so we picked a hot pink thread for this quilt. Normally on a quilt like this, I would have picked a softer color, but she wanted to be a little daring, and it's going to look just fine on this quilt. But I want to show you something. Her tension, because it is a drastically different color on the white, her tension, it looks good, don't get me wrong, but it's not as pretty as I would personally love to see it look, okay? But it's still, I mean, it's still an A for tension. But if you were to look at it, and I have not changed the tension, okay? If you were to look at it where it's not as contrasting to the fabric, man, that tension looks absolutely drop dead gorgeous, perfect, okay? But I didn't change anything. This was it on the white. This was it on the blue and the pink. And I did not touch my tension dial. The reason why I'm just showing you that is just to show you how drastically different your tension can look just because of the fabric and the thread color, okay? That's just a little bit of a tidbit from last week. Okay, so anyway, I've quilted 2 rows of quilting on this quilt. And this is what your screen looks like after you have quilted a row, okay? So the orange on my screen is the row it just finished quilting, and this little box always pops up that says long jump pause, okay? Now, when that box pops up, all I'm gonna do is just X out of it, okay? So I'm just gonna hit the X button and it'll disappear, okay? Done. The next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take off my bungee cords. Now, let's talk for just a second about that. I just want you to notice this is the way Kelley does it, not the way that everybody else does it, just Kelley and whoever else likes to do it my way. I only have my backing with my bungee cords attached, okay? And they're not pulled super tight. If I were to have these pulled super tight, it would possibly start pulling on this and distort my borders, okay? So I just have these tight enough that they're holding this, that when my machine is traveling from right to left, it's not pulling my fabric that way. It's just holding this tight, okay? Now, also, I want you to notice, and it's kind of hard to see through video, but this is not super tight from pole to pole. There is a slight dip in my quilt. And the reason why is because my quilt has to relax on my frame a little bit, okay? If I don't let this quilt relax on my frame, when I get to the bottom of it, I might have a little bit of fullness down here. And it might have a little bit of a wave because it's been so tight on my frame that it starts to gather right here in the center. So you always want it to be relaxed. You don't want it to be tight as it can be on these rails. Also, if you have it as tight as it can be on these rails, you might get skipped stitches, or it might bounce like this, like it's on a trampoline while the machine's sewing, okay? So just be thoughtful of making sure that you don't have your quilt top too tight. A good rule of thumb is after you think you have this just the way you want it for tightness, is to come over here and just take your little latch and release it and just let it loosen one notch. And a lot of times that's exactly how much you need to loosen it, okay? Now, I'm gonna put the camera back to me for a second because sometimes I feel like if I'm not looking at you, that I'm not talking to you. I'm not gonna go into too much detail about all of this because next week live is gonna be for everybody, not just Pro Stitcher users. And I'm gonna go over lots of tips and tidbits of quilting. I'm gonna go over all the screen usages on your machine, help you understand when to use cruise, when to use precision, and all that good stuff. So I'm not gonna go into huge descriptions of my bungee cords, loading, or anything like that this week, okay? So if you do have questions, I'm gonna answer the best to my ability, but I don't wanna ruin next week, okay? Okay, so let me flip you back. Hold on one second. There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna take my bungee cords off, okay? I have to say that, y'all, there's Coco. She's gonna sit here and stand guard. Okay. She's really a sweet girl. Okay, and now I'm gonna lift this latch up. Only this latch. I leave this one locked, okay? Now look, I'm not trying to sell stuff here. I'm just telling you stuff to make your life easier. If you don't have a hand wheel right here and you only have one on your take-up bar, I suggest you buy a second hand wheel from your local dealer, okay? They really make things easier. Okay, I'm gonna put you back on my tripod real quick because I'm gonna need both my hands to show y'all the next thing that I'm gonna do. Let me make sure that you're gonna be able to see me. Okay, yes. Okay, I think that's far enough. I did practice this, y'all. Okay, so I loosened my latch. Watch this. So that my quilt, as I'm advancing it, doesn't get too tight on this side versus that side from using my hand wheel as I advance it, and especially if it's a king size. I'm going to use this hand wheel, and I'm going to go ahead and make my quilt slump. Okay, so everybody notice it's slumping pretty big right now, okay? See, it's really slumping, okay? I'm gonna keep it that way. And then I'm gonna slowly advance it right here. I'm gonna slump it some more and advance it. Slump it some more and advance it. Slump it some more and advance it. I'm gonna stop right there, okay? Now I'm gonna come back with my camera and I'm gonna take you again. Okay. Hey, Miss Debbie Franklin. Hey, Miss Cindy Johnson. Okay, so it looks a mess right now, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and put my clicker down, okay? And I'm going to just turn this. I'm just turning it with my hand a couple of times, okay? And I'm gonna go ahead and I like to flip my quilt top up and make sure my batting's nice and neat underneath it. Yes, I do float my tops. We'll talk about that next week. No, it's not a sin to do that. It's perfectly okay to float your tops if you want to float your tops. Okay. I'm smoothing everything out. I do take my time doing this. Okay. And see this little bit of wrinkle right here? Because I'm not going to quilt while we're on the phone, listen to me, while we're live. And we'll talk about this again next week. I would spritz this before I do the next row and rub it with my hand with some wrinkle releaser because I don't like wrinkles in my quilt. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and put my bungee cords back on. Okay. Bungee cord. Bungee cord. Okay. Here we go, folks. Hope y'all aren't getting car sick on me from me moving my camera so much. Okay, now let me give y'all another good view. It's not super tight on my bars. There's a little bit of a slump, okay? Just letting y'all see that. Okay, now, typically, and we will talk about this again next week, typically I go ahead and I sew each side of my quilt up, tack it up, and there's a sew line right there. And then I come over here and I sew up this side. So I'm sew. Okay, and that's so nothing gets caught and flipped like this when it starts to quilt for me, okay? Now the next thing that I do is I always take my machine, looking at my needle, and I make sure that it can still reach part of that row that I advanced. My needle still can reach up there at it, okay? Now, one thing I did with this quilt was I really stretched out how deep these rows are. These rows are 14 inches deep, each one, 14, 14, 14, 14, and then there's a little partial row down here, okay? So I'm really maxing out my space. So I really need to have this as advanced up here as far as I just about can. And I've got myself about an extra inch of room up here, and I know that that's going to be okay. The next thing I've got to decide is what do I want to use as a reference point to use for drag and drop. If at all possible, I always use something that's a point, okay? So I am going to use the point of this leaf right here. Okay, let me move my machine over so you can see a little bit better. I'm going to use the point of this leaf, okay? Now, if I were to be looking on my screen, that's going to be the point of this leaf right here, okay? I hope everybody is following me still. How tight do you bungee cord? Joan, I don't have my bungee cords tight at all, and we will talk about that all next week too. But not very tight, just enough to hold my backing to where it doesn't want to squish in when I'm quilting, okay? Thank you, Jeannie. I see that you're answering for me. Appreciate that. You're the best. Okay, so now this is where it gets confusing. Right now, remember people, that crosshair on my screen represents my needle. And that crosshair on my screen represents where my needle is on my quilt, okay? So right now, remember, I have advanced my quilt so that I have space to quilt the next row, but this computer doesn't know that yet. It has no idea that I've already advanced this quilt, okay? So right now, where my needle is at, there's no longer any quilting there, okay? But I want to use the point of that leaf for drag and drop. And basically what I'm doing is I'm saying, hey leaf, point of that leaf, this is where you were at 5 minutes ago when I quilted you, but I've now moved you and you're somewhere different. And I need to show you where you're at. So I'm going to give you a piggyback ride, okay? So hop on my back, which is my crosshair, and I'm going to take you where you're at now. So hop on my back, and now I'm going to run up this hill, okay? And I'm going to show you where you're at now. Here's that leaf, y'all. There's the point of that leaf, okay? And I'm going to tell it, hey, here's where you're at, and I'll hop off my back and stay put, okay? And I'm done, okay? So again, here's that leaf on my screen, okay? But he's not down here anymore because I've moved him way up here, okay? Okay, I hope this is making sense. I hope the way my brain thinks is not completely screwing y'all up. Now, here's the next trick. It is not good enough to do this without zooming in, okay? So I'm going to zoom in tremendously. So I have to remember and consciously think about it is this leaf I'm using and it is this leaf I'm using. Now, one more thing I want to tell you. I want you to notice that I'm not using the start point or the end point of my row. I'm using as close to the dead center of this row as possible, because all of us have to face that challenge of our quilt pattern drifting from left to right, okay? It's this weird thing, a phenomenon that we all face. But you will get less of that drifting if you use your drag and drop points from the center of your rows, okay? So always try to find the center part of that row for your drag and drop, okay? So now what I'm gonna do now is, remember, I'm gonna use the point of that leaf. Now, those of you that don't know how to zoom, because y'all think it's an iPhone and y'all wanna do this number, that is so wrong. Quit thinking about iPhones, okay? Think about a diagonal. And right where my crosshair is where I really want to zoom in at. So I'm going to draw a diagonal from the top left to the bottom right, okay? So I'm going to, right here, okay? That's pretty good zoomed in. I can zoom in even more though, okay? And the more I zoom in, the more accurate I can be. And then I'm going to try to get my crosshair right there on that leaf. That's pretty doggone good, okay? Karen Lockhart, hey Kelly, my brain does not work this way. Well, Karen Lockhart, I want you to watch this video over and over again, and we are also going to do this over and over again. We're just going to do it on a different quilt in a second, okay? So again, this leaf, this point of this leaf used to be right here before I advanced my quilt. But now that leaf is right up here because I had to roll my quilt up so we have more space to quilt the next row, okay? So here's where it was at. Here it is on the screen. What I'm going to do now is tell it that I'm going to drag this point of this leaf up to where it is now and drop it in place. So I'm going to come over here to my tools on the left side of my screen, and I'm going to select drag. When I select drag, that drag disappears and drop comes up, okay? So I'm going to select drag. Okay, now it says drop, okay? So drag's gone. I'm now going to move my machine head all the way to where that leaf's at, okay? And I'm going to get as accurate as I can for my needle to be right where the point of that leaf is at. And when I think I have it perfect, I'm not going to look and worry about what this screen looks like right now, because if I were, I would be completely lost and confused and upset and think I have already messed up, and I haven't, okay? So don't worry about what this part of the screen looks like. Just come right back over here and select drop, okay? Now that I've selected drop, it went back to drag, so I'm done. Now what I want you to do is come down here and select your refresh button. And when you select your refresh button, you're gonna see that this whole quilt has moved up. Your crosshair is still on that leaf, the point of that leaf, and it's on the point of that leaf, okay? And earlier, before we dragged and dropped it, we were way down here, but now we're way up here on our quilt, okay? So now there's room to quilt that whole next row. And look, I need to test it and make sure. I'm going to take that crosshair and I'm going to go all the way on my screen to past the bottom of the next row to make sure I have plenty of space and it's not going to hit this bar with my machine before it finishes the end of this row right here. Does that make sense? I can tell that it's got plenty of throat space. So all I would do now, the only thing left for me to do, and I'm not going to push the button, is for me to just select resume. And if I were to hit resume right now, my crosshair would move to this next green dot and it would start quilting my next row. Okay? Okay. I hope that that made sense. But if it didn't, we're going to take a field trip. Okay, let's go. Because I've already got us set up over here. Okay, so earlier I quilted this quick little row right here. This is a built-in design in PS Designs. Okay, here we go. So it just quilted that row, long jump pause. All I'm going to do is just X out of that, okay? Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to advance my quilt because I have no room left to do another row, okay? So I'm just going to advance my quilt. No, I'm not doing everything perfect because this is just for us to practice drag and drop right now, okay, folks. So don't judge me, okay? Okay. So now, what do I do when there's not a point for me to choose for drag and drop? Well, that's always situational. Kelley McKenzie breaks her own rules, and me personally, I would come to the bottom of one of these circles and use that. Is it going to be 100% accurate? Probably not, because I might not get dead center in the center of this circle, and I might not put the exact same spot right here on my quilt, okay? So if I wanted to be super perfect, I might come and select this intersection right here, okay? Which would be the intersection right here on my quilt. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be difficult. I'm going to be that difficult student that we always have, okay? And I'm going to select the bottom part of this circle, okay? So here we go. I'm going to do the best that I can to get my crosshair on the bottom part of that line of that circle, okay? There it is. Now, there's nothing down here because, again, I've already advanced my quilt and moved it up. Again, this computer does not know that. So I've got to tell it that this circle is no longer where it thinks it's at. And I've got to drag and drop it in place, okay? So quit worrying about what this screen looks like now. Let's come over here and let's select drag. And look, y'all, I touched drag and it did not turn to drop. So guess what? My finger wasn't warm enough or I didn't touch it good enough. So I'm going to select drag again. Oh, now it registered, okay? Y'all always need to be careful and make sure that you actually do touch it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my machine and move it up, give it a piggyback rod to right at the bottom of that circle, come back up to my screen, not worry about what it looks like right here, come right over here and select drop, okay? Now I can refresh my screen and I can see that the line of circles has moved up, okay? So it did work. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew up the sides of my quilt very quickly, and I'm going to do everything the wrong way because I have, you know what? No, I'm not. I'm going to do everything the right way. I'm going to put you on the tripod real quick. Hold on. Yeah, I'm going to be a good girl. I'm going to do it all the right way. Okay. Oh, whoever, Amy, I can't say your last name. I did go to school in Mississippi, but your last name starts with a Y. You just made my day. Okay. So really quickly, I'm going to sew up the sides of my quilt. Okay. Now, take you back off my tripod. Oh my goodness. Okay. Now, all I have to do now, because I've secured my edges, is select resume. It's going to go down to where the next row wants to quilt. It's going to pull my bobbin thread up. I'm going to move my two threads over to the side. I'm going to select resume again. It's going to come over. Oh my goodness, y'all. Oh my goodness. Let me tell you what just happened. And of course, this has to be on a live. So when I was thinking about today, I was like, oh, I'm going to make this really easy so they can see the distinction between the rows. I'm going to make every other row different. And when I did that, I got really creative. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna make the starts and ends a little bit perfect and not make the lines on either side of them exactly the same. And then I just duplicated that and spaced them out. And then I went back and created this row and spaced it out. Well, because I did that, it remembers how you do everything in the order. So it thinks this is the next row to quilt instead of my squares. I was like, y'all, I didn't want to say it because I was like, I've got to be quiet because this is all live. It came way down here instead of like right here to quilt. So it's not going to quilt in the right spot. Well, it's going to quilt in the right spot if I was wanting to quilt this row, okay? So that did not play out the way I wanted it to. It still dragged and dropped correctly. This is so embarrassing, but this is just so awesome at the same time. So what do you do when this happens? Well, this would be the same thing if you had accidentally messed up during your drag and drop and you were gonna have to give it a new start point because it didn't want to start on the correct row, okay? Look, a lesson inside a lesson. So what I'm gonna do, because my drag and drop did still work, because if you look and I was to put the start point at the beginning of this row, it's on the start point at the beginning of that row. So everything is still lined up. It's just, it came all the way down here to do this row because Kelley told it that to do it in that order, but Kelley wasn't smart enough to realize that I told it to do that. I actually want it to start right here on this second row. So what I am going to do right now is I'm going to go to the Pro Stitcher tab. I'm going to go to New Start and New End, and I'm going to come over here to the Start column, and I'm going to hit all the way at the bottom the Jumps tab, okay? And I'm going to tell you why I'm doing that. I'm not going to use this one or this one, but this one, because this one jumps by stitches, this one jumps by segments, and this one jumps by start points. So I'm going to select one jump, and you see it jumped to the next line of circles. If I hit it again, it's going to jump to the next line of circles. Watch, there it goes. It jumped to the next line of circles. I don't want to do that one either. If I hit it again, now it jumped to the row that I actually want it to jump to, okay? So I'm going to let it now sew out that row. So I'm going to go back to Quilt, because with the new update, if you're not on Quilt, then Run is grayed out. So I'm going to go back up to Quilt. I'm going to go and select Run and Proceed. And now it wants to start in the right spot. Okay? And we're going to let it quilt that row very quickly. And I can still teach you another drag and drop after this. Okay? I have not completely messed up. I just got to teach you another lesson inside of a lesson. So we're going to let it start. I'm going to walk away from this and look at my notes. Okay? I guess this is called improvising. I wonder if movie stars ever do that. Okay, so let me look at my talking points real quick. Oh, talk about throat space. So while we're waiting for that to quilt, not quit, but quilt. Or maybe quit quilting. Let's talk about this. If you have a Pro Stitcher and you have a Quilt Maker Pro 16 and you are looking at an edge-to-edge design, make sure that the depth or the height of that design does not exceed 10 inches, okay? Can you do bigger than 10 inches? Yes, but can you do a king-size quilt and do bigger than 10 inches? Probably not by the time you get to the 5th or 6th row, okay? Because as you are quilting, this bar right here grows. And as this bar grows, this machine loses how far forward it can move because this bar grows and it grows and it grows, okay? So if you have a 16, look at the size of your panto before you make repeats of it and make sure it's no bigger than 10 inches. If you have an 18, make sure it's no bigger than 12 inches. If you have a 20 inch, make sure it's no bigger than 14 inches. Basically take the size of your throat space and minus 6 inches, and that's your safe number for if you're doing a queen or a king size quilt, okay? Okay, now it just finished a row. Okay, I'm gonna try to do this one-handed. I'm going to real quickly cut this thread. I hope you couldn't see my teeth. I just held it with my teeth. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm just gonna hold you down for just a second. Okay. Okay, so see how it's quilted the row of squares? I'm gonna just X out of this long jump pause. There's our circles, there's our squares. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select a drag and drop spot. I'm gonna use the corner of the square, okay? So the corner of the square. I'm gonna zoom in and make sure that I'm as accurate as I can be, okay? I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna select drag. I'm gonna then forget about what this screen looks like right here, forget about it. And I'm gonna look only at my quilt. And Kelley just messed up again because I got so excited I forgot to actually advance my quilt. So I'm advancing my quilt. You're supposed to do that already. Now I'm going to piggyback ride it up to where it is at. There we go. That's where I advanced it at. And now I'm going to drop it in place. I'm going to refresh my screen. It's moved it up on my screen. It's gone past that pink box. It's moved it up. Now, typically, if I were to hit resume, it would come to the third row and it would start quilting again. But remember, Kelley messed up. So I'm gonna go physically move my start point to the next row myself. And I'm actually gonna use the jump backwards button to do that, or forwards now. There we go, I went too far back. And I've got my start button where I need it to be. And I'm gonna select resume. Am I still there? I think I froze on y'all. So it's sewing, and since I did mess up just a little bit because I got excited, we're gonna do one more drag and drop before we end this video. Kelley McKenzie, please verify. Do you select the point before or after you advance? Yes, I did screw up. Typically, I always advance before I select the point. I just got excited. Okay, so that we're gonna do it one more time. It's almost done. I came back over here and I was just gonna look at my notes one last time while it was finishing it, and it's already finished before I could even look at my notes. We already talked about the throat space. So here we go. We're gonna walk back over there. Look, and I'm gonna cheat. Watch what I'm gonna do, y'all. It's almost done, tacking off. I'm just gonna move my machine over where I can get both to my top and bottom thread at the same time and snip it. Okay. Now there's our long jump pause. I'm gonna just X out of that. I'm gonna come over here, doing it the right way this time. I'm gonna go ahead and advance my quilt. Okay. Gone ahead and moved my quilt up. I didn't forget this time. But you know what this shows you? Even when you mess up, you still can get it right, okay? Now we're back on the circles. So I can decide, do I want to use across an intersection where I can be more perfect, or do I want to use the bottom of a circle? This time I'll use across an intersection, okay? So I'm gonna zoom in, and I'm gonna get my crosshair perfectly, as perfect as I can on that intersection. There we go, okay? Pretty doggone good. I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna select drag, and I'm gonna move my machine up and make sure that my needle goes directly on top of that intersection. I'm gonna not worry about what this looks like and just select drop. I'm gonna come over here and refresh my screen. It advanced my quilt once again. Look, my crosshair's right there beside that circle. It's right there beside that circle. So it's ready to do this next row for me on my screen. See, there's nothing here. It's ready to do that next row right here for me. So all I have to do is make sure I have my green start point there. And again, since I had to try to do something fancy, I'm going to move my start point because I had to do something fancy. There I go. I've got it on the right row now. So I'm going to select resume. It's going to go to that row. And it's going to start quilting that row. Okay. Now here's my question for you. I showed it to you a couple of times. Do y'all have any questions? If you do, ask me, because this was drag and drop. This was drag and drop with accidental lessons inside of it. This was drag and drop with your instructor messing up. This was drag and drop live. Okay, people? Okay. What I will do is I will go back and look for questions in case I missed some, because I'm sure I did. And I'll answer them after this live is over. But listen, next week, stay tuned. I'm probably going to still do it on Thursday at 2 because I think my Thursday is still clear for next week. And I'm going to talk about all of our screen things, precision, crews, when to use them, tips about setting up your quilt, tips about loading your quilt, things that's going to help everybody, not just Pro Stitcher users, okay? And again, remember, my email is kmckenzie@janome-america.com. Please email me things that you would like to see us help you with, okay? Okay, thank y'all for joining me today. I hope I did an okay job showing you drag and drop and I didn't make it worse for you. If you have more questions, remember my favorite person to do drag and drop is Adam. So fun. And so is SEW. His drag and drop method to me is his video for it is spectacular. It is exactly how I do it. So again, Adam, so fun. But I will see you next week. Thank you all for joining, and I will talk to you soon. Bye, y'all.